Most people are totally unaware of the fact that the ancient Egyptians were using powerful psychoactive substances for spiritual and religious purposes. And what they saw or witnessed while using these potent psychoactives may have been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, and it's nothing short. See, now, I recently had the great pleasure of being a guest on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, where we had a lengthy conversation on many thought-provoking topics, and you can view that full episode for free on Spotify. I'll include a link down below. But at the end of our conversation, I shared my own personal DMT experience from a few years ago, where I saw or witnessed a pyramid. So listen to this, as it's going to tie into the entire video and in the most bizarre way. Because I only shared part of my DMT story while on that podcast. And in this video, I'm going to suggest that the ancient Egyptians were trying to show us what they saw or witnessed while using certain psychedelic substances, and the implications are that some of the most notable hieroglyphs in existence have been completely mistranslated. Now let me start by quickly sharing my story, as again, it will tie into all of this. And let me just preface all of this by saying, do not do any illicit substances. Do not do drugs. Drugs are bad. Do not do them. And the purpose of this video is for posterity and educational purposes to inform people of the use of certain psychedelic substances by ancient civilizations. So, all that aside, here's my experience. This was early in 2018, and I was depressed and looking for answers in my life. So, I chose to embark on a psychedelic experience. We'll call this a religious experience, but I was trying to find answers in my life and reduce my suffering, let's say. So there I was. I inhaled DMT. And what I started to witness within moments was a couple things. One, I started hearing a loud pinging or ringing sound inside my head. And this was not the same as tinnitus, which I've experienced years ago from back when I was in the military and loud noises and stuff. Like, I know the difference. This sounded like it was coming inside my head, and it was loud. And then I started seeing the whole room, the walls and the furniture, vibrate. It was like going in and out. It was like, whomp, 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 whomp. Crazy. And then the first thing I saw was these 3 or 4 little blobs to my left. There were these oddly shaped round blobs, and they had faces. And I don't know how to describe this other than that I got a bad feeling from them. They had a weird vibe. They didn't look happy. But then what I saw after that was a being, which I interpreted to be feminine, although she didn't have hair or anything, but it just looked feminine. And she had really big eyes, kind of like an alien, but not like an alien, if that makes any sense. And she was made up, she was like geometric in nature, like made a bunch of lines that were made up of all the colors. And what I saw was coming out of her body was a pyramid from, say, the chest all the way down, and she was going like this nonstop. Just like that. And now, that's it. That was the whole experience. And let me just say a couple things. My first of all, I couldn't have been more surprised to see a pyramid. I know some of you are saying, like, oh, this is the ancient history guy, of course he's going to see a pyramid. Like no. Like, guys, I think about all kinds of things throughout the day, and at that point in time in my life, I was focused entirely on spirituality and just self-help, let's say. So I was surprised. And something else is that I then understood what Terence McKenna had famously said when describing his DMT experiences, was that you're witnessing the impossible. And I knew what he meant because I never could have imagined that I could have visualized something like that. Like, we all have imaginations. This was different. And I couldn't tell you if what I saw was in my imagination or actually in front of me in some other realm or dimension or something. And I'll get into that later in the video, along with talking about the fact that it made me, what I took away from this experience more than anything wasn't that I saw a pyramid, was that between the sound of my head and the room vibrating and these bizarre color shapes in front of me, it made me question the reality of our existence in terms of frequency. And again, I'll touch on that later in the video. But so getting on to the point. So fast forward, actually this is worth mentioning. The whole experience, by the way, was only 4 minutes. That was shocking as well because I recorded it, so that's how I know. And I remember that when I kind of came to, it feels like you're kind of waking up, coming out of a dream, and I look at the clock, and I'm like, how was this only 4 minutes? You know, I don't know how long I think it was, but like it felt like I woke up from an hour's long nap or something. So that was crazy. But anyway, getting on to the story of nearly 3 years later, I'm in Egypt in November, December, doing a tour with Yosef Aoyan, who is the son of the legendary tribal elder Hakim Abdel Aoyan, who was famously had a role in the Pyramid Code, which starred alongside John Anthony West. It's a docuseries, absolutely fascinating. Wonderful man, by the way. And so he had told the stories of the Kemetians, which were the people that were to exist before the Egyptians that we know about. So that's what he would teach on his tours. And he did not believe that the pyramids were built to be tombs, and neither do I. So I asked Yosef, I said, well, what are the pyramids? And he said that his father had told him that they're us. And instantly, I remembered my DMT experience from nearly 3 years earlier, where I saw this pyramid coming out of a body. I just blew my mind. And if you want to hear more details on this or Joe Rogan's thoughts on my story, go check out Spotify podcast. And that story was at the end of the podcast, I should say. So all of this is obviously bizarre. And I want to point out a couple things, because I know some people are like, this guy's talking about his drug use and he's seeing things like, hold on a second. Like, yes, illegal substance, sure, and do not do it. But you should look into the science behind this. Like DMT, which is short for dimethyltryptamine, is found naturally in the human body. It's been proven to be produced in the lungs and the liver, and there's overwhelming evidence that it's produced within the pineal gland in the human brain. And there was an advanced study done on this in the 1990s by Dr. Rick Strassman, DEA study. Fascinating. And there was a book and a documentary on it called The Spirit Molecule. Highly recommend you check it out. But it has been believed for hundreds of years, minimum, that the pineal gland may be the source of where dreams and near-death experiences come from. And that was theorized by Rene Descartes. So you should look into this. This is absolutely fascinating. So how this ties into now the ancient Egyptians? Well, so let's talk about the lotus flower, which, by the way, is the national flower of Egypt. And it happens to contain psychoactive elements. And this flower was said to be used by the Egyptians to connect to the divine, as well as having healing properties to it. And there are countless depictions of the lotus flower carved into stone within Egypt. And the academic explanation is that the lotus flower is symbolism of life, creation, and rebirth. And it's often depicted as being presented to the gods or the pharaohs by high Egyptian priests, representing the gift of sacred knowledge of life. And it's interesting to point out that it is often depicted while holding the Ankh, which is the Egyptian symbol for the key of life. Interesting. But what else do we see here? This is the lotus flower, and it's pretty apparent that it's portraying it being smoked out of a pipe. I mean, notice that the flower is consistently situated right in between the two of them, while holding a pipe that is literally emitting smoke. But now focus your attention on those pyramid-shaped skirts that they're wearing, clearly in the shape of a pyramid. And perhaps one of the more famous examples of this was a statue of the god Anubis that was found in King Tut's tomb within the Valley of the Kings. But here's something that I never noticed until recently. Look more closely and notice that each of the base corners is depicting the lotus flower seemingly shining up and into the body. You can also observe this same depiction on various hieroglyphs as well. So I'm just going to say it. This makes me wonder if what I saw was similar to something that some Egyptians may have seen as well. I mean, I never made this connection until recently, because it wasn't until I noticed that the lotus flower on these skirts for the first time that made me think of it. Because let me just say, this is much different than what I saw. Like, I saw a feminine face, I guess, and I didn't see anything about Anubis or Horus face on it. and the pyramid shape was up into the chest. So I never ever made the connection on this. But when I saw the lotus flower on the corners of this pyramid-shaped skirt, it all of a sudden clicked. Now hang on to that thought while I share a few other details that brings us all together. And it may blow your mind, as it certainly did for me. But
caught in a cycle of overeating, and one day I woke up and I was 35 pounds heavier.
It's hard mentally. Your self-esteem drops. You don't fit in your clothes anymore. Your confidence goes down.
The so-called Eye of Horus is perhaps one of the most notable depictions from all of ancient Egypt, and is said to symbolize protection, health, and restoration. And it comes from the eye of the god Horus, which is a falcon. Now, others have theorized that this eye is meant to depict the pineal gland that's at the center of the human brain. The appearance is remarkably similar, and it has already been widely established that the Egyptians had great understanding of the human body, as they would remove organs during the mummification process. However, some will say that this comparison is a bit of a reach, but if you study it more closely, tell me that the brainstem doesn't strongly resemble the shape of a falcon. Just look at it. And what makes this so bizarre is that through the study of DMT, which strong evidence suggests is produced within the pineal gland, just as it has been proven in mice and rats, and not to mention, DMT is the only substance that penetrates the blood-brain barrier. No drug does it, not even alcohol, yet it goes right into the body, or right into the brain. But that aside, and to make this even more interesting, look at this antenna-looking thing above the head of Horus. Could this be depicting that the use of certain psychoactive substances is a gateway of sorts to assessing or accessing other dimensions, frequencies of existence of some kind? And I mean, one reason why I say that is because one of the impressions I got when I did DT was the room was vibrating, I heard this sound in my head, it all was like a frequency. And if you consider that the basis of our reality is, by definition, an illusion, that we're made up of atoms, and atoms are held together by this mysterious force, and no atoms are touching. So essentially, at the molecular level, everything we witness is, again, by definition, an illusion. Now, again, compare all of the striking similarities to the very shapes of these depictions in relation to the human brain. And what I am suggesting is that through the nature of things being lost in translation, especially over thousands of years, this important knowledge was forgotten or lost, assuming that I'm correct to theorize that the Egyptians are showing us doing psychedelic substances. But they are, though. The lotus flower is right there, and they're smoking it with these bizarre faces of dogs and falcons and everything else on. So the true meanings of this, I feel, based on my own experience and perspective, I think there's something here. So it's by no means a reach to suggest the possibility. Because when there are so many depictions carved in stone showing us that they were smoking a pipe with the lotus flower right there, as well as depictions of the pyramid skirts on the body, which have, again, the lotus flower on them, while on a being that has the head of a falcon, which, again, just so happens to be the shape of the brainstem, and the brainstem connects to the pineal gland. And then you have that antenna-shaped thing all on top of it. Is it essentially like saying that our brains are like Wi-Fi? Because this ties into different things that Nikola Tesla had said, that everything was a frequency and vibration, and that he believed ideas were coming from the wheelwork of the universe. It's fascinating. And this is one of the most prolific inventors of all time. So it makes me think that this could be reality, as crazy as it may sound. Like I always say, look and think for yourself. But all of that said, I have to say that if nothing else, this is a massively thought-provoking conversation, and I'm very eager to see what comments and experiences people share on this video. But I'm going to close this up here because there's another video I want to get working on, and this will be something I will discuss again, because this topic, there's more to be said on it. But again, go check out that podcast on Spotify. I want to say it's worth your time. It was a hell of a fun experience. I'll have to share that because many of you who have been following me from the beginning know that I had said like more than 4 years ago in one of my videos that I
there was significant rainfall in the Nile Valley was 9,000 years ago.
Yep.
And then you have to look at the thousands of years of rainfall required to make these deep fissures. The softer areas are eroded, and you have these deep vertical fissures that indicate that water coming down from the top and leaking through have created all this stuff. And so his timeline is thousands of years before 9,000 BC, because it's required that much time to create this erosion. That's very controversial around traditional, the Egyptologists that want to follow the conventional timeline. They come up with all sorts of alternative reasons for why these fissures exist, but one of the more fascinating things that Robert Schoch did was he put masking tape over the areas that would clearly indicate where this was happening. And he brought it to a series of geologists. And he said, does this image represent, in your opinion, wind and sand erosion, or does it indicate water? All of them said it indicated water. All of them said it indicated rainfall. And then when he pulled it aside and showed that this was actually the Sphinx, they were like, I'm not putting my fucking name on that. Like, very few of them wanted to stick their neck. More have since he's come forward. There's been many geologists that have agreed with him, but initially people are very hesitant to stick their neck out, because in academia, which is really fascinating, challenging conventional ideas gets you in deep shit. Because even though we would like to believe that these archaeologists and scientists and historians only base their opinions on data, only base their opinions on what's in front of them, that's not true. A lot of them have a long history of teaching things that eventually turn out to be incorrect. And they are deeply embarrassed, and they fight it tooth and claw. They do everything they can to discredit any idea that they could be incorrect. And it's fascinating to watch. And one of them that was fascinating to watch was John Anthony West and Robert Schoch had this conversation about the Sphinx and about the erosion of the Sphinx with this conventional Egyptologist that was working with Zawi Hawass, who was the head of Antiquities. And when they did have this conversation, the way this guy was mocking them, the way this guy was saying, where's the evidence of this civilization from 12,000 years ago capable of doing this? Like, he was using your mocking voice, like using the voice that you use for your detractors. And it wasn't a scientific conversation. It wasn't like a fact-based, objective analysis of all the evidence that's in front of you. It was instead this guy trying to defend these decades of teaching. He's been writing books and papers and teaching lectures about this stuff, and it turns out he's probably really wrong. And he was fighting it with every ounce of his being. Now, since that, then the construction, or then the excavation of Göbekli Tepe took place, where they realized that this is undeniably at least 12,000 years old, because it's covered somewhat intentionally. They think that intentionally it was covered up, that it was buried 12,000 years ago. So that means, well, how long was this fucking thing built? How long ago was this made? If someone intentionally covered it up 12,000 years ago, how long was it around before they did that?
Right.
So this is that evidence that guy was talking about. This evidence of an advanced civilization. Now we know for sure there's evidence of an advanced civilization. We have the actual stone structures, we have the actual carbon dating, and not just a little bit of it. We have massive amounts of it, because the entire structure has been slowly excavated, and it reveals this enormous series of buildings and of stone columns, 3D carvings that are in it. It's really wild stuff. And the idea that this was all done by unsophisticated hunters and gatherers who had time to build this in between, like, eating berries and trying to kill squirrels, like, it's wild.
It is, and there's a few things to say there, Joe. So going back to Dr. Robert Schoch, so what I had heard is that when he presented that water erosion evidence of the Sphinx, apparently he was at like a conference of nearly 200 geologists, and everyone in the room was like, yeah, that's, because he did a comparison essentially as like, would you agree that this limestone has water erosion, and would you agree that this limestone has wind and sand erosion?
Right.
It's a resounding yes, and it turns out he was showing you two different parts of the Sphinx. The enclosure has the water erosion,
and the above the neck in the chest has the wind and sand.
Yeah.
And what's so wild about this, Joe, is there's still so many people in the so-called, like on the mainstream, that are denying this water erosion. Like, this is the thing, so Jay, I don't consider myself an expert. I'm somebody that can look at, I mean, I know more than maybe some, but like, I can look at information and think for myself on a variety of topics. Just show me, I want to hear both sides, and I can think, I can use discernment. And what's so interesting to some people who are trying to debunk Dr. Robert Schoch's work, it's like, you know, because we have www.google.com, you can literally go and look for examples of limestone from around the world that have known water erosion, and then go do the same for the wind and sand erosion, and then it's there for all who have eyes to see. The enclosure has significant water erosion. I mean, this is literally, you don't have to go to school for a bunch of years to get a doctorate in geology to at least wrap your head around that it is indeed water erosion. And the implications of it are astounding, because it means that if the Sphinx is supposed to be 4,200 years old, and yet the last time the Nile Delta region had significant rainfall was nearly double the age of that, that in itself is, I mean, I would consider that to be scientific evidence that it is older.
What's the hardest evidence we have, really? Geological evidence is the most, it's the most tangible, because you could actually see it. It's like, it's right there. And everything else, they're slowly uncovering history. And as they're literally uncovering it, they're digging this stuff up. And particularly in Egypt, what's really fascinating is that they find these completely different building structures, like these construction methods. If you go back to the older buildings that are deeper under the ground, they have a very different style to them.
Yeah.
Like, they use much larger stones, and they use them like sitting on top of each other, like as like these structures in these hallways and columns. And it's like you clearly see the difference between the stones where they laid stones next to each other, and this one where there are immense stones sitting on other immense stones. There's a very specific style to them. And it seems like the more sophisticated methods are the older methods, because the stones are larger.
It's true. And the reality is that what we know, the ancients were more advanced than what we give them credit for. And one thing I've seen as I've gone down this path about talking about potential lost technology is people need to realize, like, the word advanced is relative. When you say that they were advanced, some people will jump to the conclusion, like, oh, so you're suggesting they had internet, and let's go back to that place again, and Wi-Fi and other things. I'm like, advanced is relative. It means that they had more capabilities than what we give them credit for. And yeah, it's another thing I was about to say, is that I'm losing my train of thought on that. Technology. Technology can be anything. A saddle on a horse is technology.
Yeah.
When people think technology, some people jump and think, what does that mean? They have lasers,
right.
Yeah, machinery and stuff. I'm like, no, it just means they had a capability that is since gone, or we're just not aware of.
Well, let's talk about the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber and the way that they somehow or another carved it out. Because there's real evidence that there was some sort of a circular drill tool that they used to carve out the inside of the sarcophagus. And something that had an incredibly hard cutting surface. Mm-hmm. They don't know what it was, but if you go to, there's images of the inside of the sarcophagus, and they showed that they were trying to figure out like how this thing carved. See if the carving methods, circular drill. So type in circular drill carving. There was this whole debate about how they dug it out, and they think that correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it made out of one large piece of granite?
Correct, rose granite.
Yeah, and they think that what they did was use some sort. Does it show it there?
All I remember seeing on it was rake marks. Like, well,
there was some sort of a documentary that was pointing to some aspect of it that said it seemed like they used some sort of a circular drilling tool to hollow out the center of this thing. What is that right there? Lower left-hand corner.
Copper coring drills.
Copper coring drills. Look at that. Look at right there, the middle one.
Yep.
What is that? What the fuck is that?
So that's them carving out a using that same drilling technique that you're referring to,
Yeah.
and just doing over and over again to carve out.
So there's a core grilled granite. So you see it right there in the lower right hand, yeah, that's it right there. Like, look at that. So
Yeah.
what is that? Like, how do they drill that?
Yeah.
So there's core drilled granite in ancient Egypt. And what we're looking at is something that looks like it was a circular drill that was pulling out these cylinders from the granite. And how they did that and how long it took. See, this is an incomplete drilling, which is really fascinating because you can actually see that it probably took a long ass time for them to do this. And you see like a partially done version of it. But we see these circular cuts like that right there. Like, what the fuck did they use?
Some argue that the
Go to that,
repetition
Click on
of
that
these drill holes was done at a speed you couldn't possibly do with your own hand. I mean, I'm not.
Why did they say that?
Well, so if you measure from each striation to the next, that would indicate one revolution of the drill. And so some are saying that it's far quicker. And let me give a shout out real quick to my buddy Ben, who I went to Egypt and Peru with. He has an awesome YouTube channel called Uncharted X, and
Uncharted X is a great channel.
He's
It's another
wonderful.
one. Yeah.
You would love to talk to him.
He is from Australia.
He is.
Yeah.
Lives here in the States with his wife, who are wonderful people. And I got to tell you,
So
that
look at this right here.
he gets deep into this stuff, Joe.
I'm sure he does. His YouTube channel is incredible. So if you look at this is a modern tool that they're using to do the same or similar work. And what it is a tool that's on this like tread or track, and it rolls in and drills as it rolls in. And they have a circle. These are diamond tip machines that are hydraulic pressured. And the Egyptologists claim, it says right here, the Egyptologists claim that ancient Egyptians cut granite using copper saws, water, and sand. It says fine cutting granite, separating a stone block into two pieces. We do not doubt this. It's doable. But to reach the level of precision found in, how do you say that word? Abusir? Abusir.
Should be 2 words.
Manual work is not enough. Not enough in terms of pressure and regularity. In order to cut granite today, we try to reach a pressure on the drilling head of 18 to 30 pounds per square inch, which is 226 to 380 pounds of pressure for a 4-inch diameter drill hole. How can you apply such pressure by hand while keeping a mobile tool in order for it to actually perform the drilling? This is the question. So they're trying to figure out what the fuck these people use, but they use something. Because if you look at that, so that's a good example. William Matthew Flinders Petrie, during the late 19th century research, and he wrote that the level reached is astonishing in terms of the drilled holes. So you can see the grooves.
Yeah.
And the grooves help determine the power of the machines. And here is what you were just talking about. The space between the two grooves indicates how further the machine goes after each drilling revolution. The space between grooves and abusir are between 1/125th of an inch and 1/10th of an inch. Wow. Look at that fucking crazy. In 1983, Chris Dunn interviewed Dr. Ronald Ron from the, am I saying his name right?
That looks right.
R-A-H-N. Ron from the Ron Granite Surface Plate Company in Dayton, Ohio. Ron indicated that in order to drill granite, we're using heads drilling at a revolution speed of 9,000 revolutions per minute. Or 900 revolutions per minute, going 1 inch into the block every 5 minutes, every 300 seconds. In other words, 2 10,000ths of an inch for every revolution. The tools used by the Egyptians were therefore 180 for 1/10 of an inch between the grooves, to 450 for 1/25th of an inch in between the grooves, times better performing than our 1983 modern technology. Fuck. That's crazy. But look at these. We're looking at these images, folks, of these holes that they cut into the granite, and you see these perfect grooves where whatever they were using, whatever kind of drill they were using, had left behind. And the fact that these drills were far better than what we had in the 1980s when they wrote this.
It's worth mentioning that, see, this is another example where there's two different examples, because I have seen examples where there's some that is primitive and you can do it with like a piece of wood and you just bend it over time and you keep grinding away and
Hold up. So don't change. Stay right there. Keep going.
and then there's a difference between these ones with the striations, and I'm like, because some people, immediately like, no, they were capable of doing some drilling with primitive methods. I'm like, I agree, but then you have these ones that are spectacular, and I would like to see these methods demonstrated. See, that's the thing, Joe. There's going to be some people listening to this and be like, wow, I'm sure that there's got to be an explanation, but Joe, I can show you videos of them demonstrating saw cutting techniques that are said to have been done by the Egyptians, or alleged, these primitive methods. You see how slow it is, Joe.
Yeah, Jamie, stop scrolling. Go up a little bit. Look at this. What it says right here. They're showing a video, and it says in this video we see a 10-inch hole being drilled in only 3 minutes. This is a modern video. A real feat. It says, let's do the same calculation. By this time, it'll take a 1200 RPM revolution speed, 33% faster than in 1983. So what they had in 1983. So all these calculations, blah, blah, blah. We're still, right now, in 1983, they were 14 times less effective than the Egyptians, with grooves separated by 1/25 of an inch. It says, but what does 14 times less efficient really mean? It means that while our modern diamond tips machinery completed one revolution and drilled 1/360th of an inch, the Egyptian tool had already drilled 1/25 of an inch, 14 times more. Wow.
The evidence is in front of us, Joe.
This is wild shit, man.
People say, what's the evidence that ancients were advanced? I'm like, it's right there. Like that. Oh God, here we go.
This is the video they're talking about.
So this is the video of them using modern equipment to drill into it, and saying that the stuff that they had in 1983, that the Egyptians had something that was 14 times better.
And keep in mind, again, diamond tipped. That's what people remember. Like, so are we suggesting the ancients had that? Because that's what we're using. And they pour water over it the whole time too, because otherwise the thing will melt.
Right. So we have zero idea how they did it.
Correct. It is.
But we do know they did it.
Someone did it. Absolutely.
What's amazing is seeing that actual physical evidence. Is again the geological evidence. I guess it's sort of geological and archaeological at the same time, right? Because they're carving into stone.
Right.
But seeing these carvings, the marks, and the fact that it's a perfect tube, that they pulled the cylinder out.
Yep. Jamie, will you real quick bring up my YouTube page? There's my second to most recent video. There's a short clip in it where I show you these mainstream Egyptologists, Zahi Hawass, Mark Lehner, the top dogs. Like, their names are cited in every textbook on these subjects. And you will see these methods where they try these primitive methods, and they demonstrate. And it's it's so unbelievably slow, it's not feasible to be the explanation. And let me just say, the only reason why these are the suggested methods, Joe, is because, like, well, the Egyptians were a bronze culture, so they had to use bronze, and that's the end of the story. Yet there's not one single depiction, Joe. All right, that one, this is where it says, this is how you know ancients. All right, that one. And just skip forward, perhaps.
Look at that handsome bastard. So here's an amazing photo of how close the cuts were, and about how precision cut these stone slabs that were used for the flooring are.
Compare that to my hotel room key. That's
It's
right
incredible.
next. That's flooring tile, casings, or stones, excuse me. That's right next to the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
All right, so Jamie, if you go back, I believe it's between the first minute and 2 minutes, actually, the clip is.
Where they're trying to recreate
You
it.
go forward a little bit more.
Wow, look at that, by the
Look
way.
at that sucker, 30 tons. So there's Ben, Uncharted X, love you. There he is right there.
Hi, Ben.
Uh,
Ditch the ponytail, buddy.
No, don't tell him that. No, he's got to bring that back. He's got to keep growing his hair, and he needs to lay it out. You go a little bit forward,
Look at
Jamie.
that stone with you standing in front of it. That's incredible.
All right. Yeah. So that one right there is at least 50 tons and was brought from more than 500 miles away. And look at the polygonal nature of it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. That's
what's
rose granite.
fascinating to me, is that they chose to cut it perfectly flat with no gap, but yet uneven.
This is
in
it.
that they make these like interesting jigsaw puzzle-like shapes.
They're interlocked,
Yeah.
totally earthquake-proof. And Sir Jimmy, just go back.
Do you think that's why they carved it like that?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
my best
obviously-
guess, and that's just showing off because how awesome it looks.
Look
but
at this picture.
Yeah. So this is them. This is okay. So right there, that's the alleged method. All right, go back a few more seconds. Right there. I know it's because it's 18-minute videos. All right there, press pause if you could. So this is a recreation of a glyph of a painting that once existed. It was destroyed. But so this is, Joe, quite literally the only example of them even doing anything with stone depicted. There's one other stone or picture that's right next to it doing a statue. But this, just to clarify, is not showing them cut a block. Those are, I mean, this is
the measuring methods.
Yeah.
What do you think they're using in terms of like when those guys are on their knees and they have those things that are it's showing a line? What do you think that is?
I
that
think
like
that
a level?
I think that they're doing measurements in order to put in hieroglyphs because we know they did. There's actual evidence of them doing glyphs over prior work. It's on some of the statues, and so it quite literally could just be showing them carved stuff into it. Because I saw examples where you have this wonderful stone and then these crude glyphs carved into it, and I'm like, it's like Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. Why would the glyphs look like shit in comparison to a wonderful block? And that's not to say all the glyphs look like shit. Some are spectacular and were done by the Egyptians. They are the dynastic Egyptians. Let me just clarify to anyone listening. Dynastic Egyptians are the so-called ancient Egyptians we were all learned about in school. My argument and others' argument is that there was people before them doing work. And something worth mentioning, Joe, is that the people in Egypt, they believed in what's called Kemet, the people, K-H-E-M-I-T, the people that existed before the Egyptians. And, you know, when we hear these stories about the Great Pyramid being for a tomb for the pharaoh, it's worth mentioning that even the locals didn't believe that. And those theories weren't developed until the latter part of the 1800s, early 1900s, by explorers that came in from Germany, France, and England, and they are the ones. So just to clarify, the saying that the pyramids were built to be tombs for the pharaohs, that was their purpose, wasn't even developed until 150 years ago. That's it. They were taught Kemet. And so you've seen the Pyramid Code, right? Have I heard you say that a long time ago?
Yes.
So it's on Netflix. So the tribal elder, Hakim Abdel Awian, that's in it, and he's the one teaching Kemet. So he's talking about the people before the Egyptians. And so when I went to Egypt, I went and did a tour with one of his sons named Yosef Awian, and they live across the street from the Sphinx. It's been passed down in the family. They're on the 5th floor, and it literally, their patio overlooks the Sphinx. And he's also a master stonemason. But that's how I learned this stuff. Like, we're taught, like, these theories that, like, oh, the pyramids were tombs, that's recent, and it was by invaders, so to speak. Like, that's not something that was thought before that. And the locals in Egypt...
How did it become doctrine? How did it become what everybody teaches?
So Egypt became